Hello everybody, welcome to Sane Game Studios. I'm Sane, I'm an amateur game developer. Today on Gamemaker Tutorials, I'm going to be taking a look at a couple different pausing systems. Just a couple different ways for you to pause your game. From the eyes of the player, pausing seems like something that's almost magical. You hit a button, the entire game freezes. For a developer, it's nowhere near that simple. I don't know how it works in other game engines, but I know in Gamemaker you have to create your pausing system yourself. So I'm going to go through a little bit of what a pausing system can look like in a couple different methods, and I'm going to be showing you guys how to implement it into your own projects. I'm going to be showing you guys one where we simply just deactivate all of the instances that exist on the in whatever room the player is currently occupying. And I'm also going to be doing one where we legitimately just change a variable, and that prevents any animations from animating or any code being ran. And it is actually my preferred method for pausing. Sarah Spalding actually has another method for pausing where you take like almost a screenshot of the existing level, deactivate all of the instances so that they're no longer being drawn or anything. It makes your level look empty, but then you draw that screenshot over it, which gives it the same effect that my method of just freezing everything and no longer running code will have, but it will actually deactivate all of the instances. I will be looking for that video, and I will be putting a link to it in the description down below if you are interested in a third method for pausing. With that being said, I can show you guys what I have going on for my starter project. If you watch my video on improving platformer movement, you're going to recognize almost everything I have here. So in my sprites, I very simply have a square for S player, but I'm actually going to be using that to represent an enemy. I have my animation sprites for animating my player. And then finally, I have a square for the wall. In my rooms, I only have one room. And it just consists of a very simple platformer with a platform in the middle. And this here is the player, and that there is the enemy. They look identical now, but once you run the project, the player animates itself into an actual player, whereas the enemy just stays a square, and I believe I have them set to walk back and forth. And then in my objects, I just have O wall, which has no code. It's just being used to reference for collision reasons. I have O player. I'll go through this code with you really quick. If you watch my tutorial on improving platformer movement, all of this code is going to be very similar. I have just used that project to build this. So like none of the code in the player has changed since that tutorial. So all I'm doing in the create event is I'm declaring my variables for getting my player input. I'm declaring my variables for movement. I'm declaring my variables for my jump height and my walk acceleration and my speed and then the gravity and all that. A boolean for whether or not we are on the ground. And a timer for coyote time. If you watch my improving platformer movement tutorial, you'll know exactly what coyote time is. Or if you're just a seasoned gamer, you will probably know what coyote time is. In the step event, I am simply grabbing my player input. I am figuring out whether or not I should move. If I am moving, so if move does not equal 0, I am accelerating in the respective direction. Here, if I press the up key, so if I hit key up and the coyote time timer is above 0, I am jumping, and then I am adding gravity to my jump. Here I'm just doing a simple horizontal collision where if I am walking and I am about to hit a wall, I cease my movement, but first I inch towards the wall slowly until I actually make perfect contact with it, and then I set my horizontal speed to 0. I do the same thing with my vertical collision. The only difference is I set grounded to true and I set the coyote time timer to 10. And then if I am not currently on the ground, grounded is set to false and I am minusing 1 off of coyote time. Since I am using coyote time up here instead of the grounded variable to check whether or not I can jump, I actually no longer need this grounded variable. I usually keep it around anyways because it is very handy for a quick reference for whether or not you are on the ground, depending on what you are currently trying to do in your game. It might be relevant for something else you code in later. Here I am committing to my movement, just updating my X and Y position based on my horizontal and vertical speed. And then here I am establishing my conditions for what sprite I should be using when. So if I am currently moving, I am setting my image X scale to equal the direction that I am moving. And then if I'm on the ground, I am setting my my sprite to equal S player idle, so my idle sprite, if my horizontal speed is 0, so if I am not moving. If I am moving, it is set to S player walk. If I am not grounded and my vertical speed is less than 0, which means I am moving upwards in the Y direction, I am setting my sprite index to equal my jump sprite. And if it is greater than 0, which means I'm moving downwards on the Y direction, I am setting my sprite index to equal my fall sprite. I have an O enemy here. Just setting some very simple things, my walk speed, my horizontal speed, my vertical speed, my gravity, and then a Boolean called going right. I'll show you what I'm doing with that really quick. If I am going right, so if going right is true, my HSP equals my walk speed, so I am updating my my horizontal position by my positive walk speed to move to the right. And if I'm about to hit a wall, I'm setting going right to false. And if going right is false, I am minusing my walk speed off of my horizontal speed, which then moves me in the left direction, so the negative direction. And then if I'm hitting a wall in that direction, I am setting going right to true. And then I am updating my position. Here I am just adding gravity, just in case I'm ever off the ground. And actually it spawns off the ground, so I have that there to make sure that it falls to the floor and then starts moving. I set my vertical collision to make sure that it does stop falling when it hits the ground, and then I'm updating my Y position. And then in my camera object, very simply, I'm just grabbing the ID of my camera. I'm getting half of the width of the size of the camera and half of the height. In my end step, I am setting this object to equal my O player X and my O player Y, and I am also updating the camera position to equal to the position of this object minus half width and half height, because the camera is always going to be in the top left corner of what you see, but I want to make it easy to control. I offset it from the object, so I know that I can put the object in the center of wherever I want, and that will put it in the center of the screen. It makes calculating camera movement much easier if you do it that way, in my opinion. And then if I run this, here I am, able to move around, able to jump. There's my enemy that legitimately just paces back and forth. If the enemy hits me, it doesn't have any effect on the player because I have not programmed in any type of collision for that or anything. So it just legitimately just bounces back and forth between the two walls. So with all of this in mind, let's create a pausing system. So like I said, there's going to be two different ways I'm going to be showing you guys how to do this today. The first way, which is honestly the simplest way, is I'm just going to deactivate all of the instances. I will then later show you guys how to activate specific instances so you can keep some of them active. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into my objects. I'm going to create a new object. I'm going to call this OGame. I'm not 100% sure, but I am pretty sure I've shown you guys my OGame object before. I do it a lot in every single project for just overall game management. It is going to be a persistent object that is, I usually create it by code during game initialization, like during the title sequence, and then it just exists from there on out. And actually, before I get going on coding in this game, I'm actually going to create a script. I'm going to go create script. And I'm going to call this globals. This is another thing that I always do. I create an empty script without a function, and I use it for declaring anything that is global in scope, whether it be a global variable, whether it be a macro. Anything that is global in scope that can be referenced by anything at any time, I always declare it in an empty script. And the reason why I do it in an empty script, and more importantly outside of a function, is that when Gamemaker first opens up your project, like even if it's as an executable. When it first opens a project, the first thing it's going to do is it's going to run through all of your scripts, every single one. So if you create an empty script, what it's going to do is it's going to run the script before anything else. And if you create global variables, the game itself is what holds those variables. So you are creating those variables inside of the game, and they can then be referenced even in the create event of your very first created instance. This just makes all of your global variables, anything that's global in scope, just blatantly exist. It's a really great tool. So I'm going to be creating a global variable, and I'm going to call it global.paused, and I'm going to have that equal false, because we don't want to start the game paused. And that's all I'm going to do in that script. And I'm going to add a create event. And for now, I think the only variable I'm going to need is key pause equals false. And then I'm going to go to my step event. And I'm going to say I'm going to say key pause equals keyboard check pressed VK enter. So I'm going to make it so that my enter key, as soon as my enter key is pressed, well, if it's pressed this frame, this will return true. And then I'm going to say if key pause. So if we have hit the pause key, I'm going to say if global.paused equals false, global.paused equals true. Else, global.paused equals false. So all I am doing is if you hit the pause key, it is going to check whether or not we are currently paused. And if we are not currently paused, it is going to pause. But if we are currently paused, it is going to unpause. You can just be like global.paused equals negative global.paused. And what that does is it just makes this equal the opposite of whatever it already is set to. It does work. I don't know why, I just prefer to do it this way. And now I'm going to say if global.paused instance deactivate all. And then in the brackets, you look at the bottom down here. In brackets, it says not me. And that is asking if you want to deactivate every single instance, or if you want to deactivate every single instance except for the one calling this function, which I do want to do. I want to be like true, because I want my game object to not be deactivated, because if it is deactivated, there is no possible way for me to unpause. So now I'm going to go else. So if we are not paused, I'm just going to say instance activate all. And honestly, that's all we have to do for this super basic pausing system. And if I go into my room now, I can add OGame to the room. And then if I run it, and then I hit enter, everything disappears because I am deactivating everything. That includes my walls, my enemy, my player. Everything on the screen is being deactivated. But then I can activate it again, and it all appears. And honestly, this is a decent way to do a pausing system if you have a pause menu that fills like 90% of the screen. If the player is not going to be seeing this, then it is fine. Because when you think about it, you are only deactivating the instances. You are not deactivating your tile layers. You're not deactivating your art. You are just deactivating anything that is currently running code. So if you were to instance deactivate all of your collision objects, all of your enemies, your player, everything will deactivate, but you will still see your tile sets, you'll still see your backgrounds, you'll still see all of that. So you could fill 90% of the screen with some sort of kind of menu box, and the player itself would never know that nothing else even exists right now. So depending on what your project's needs are, this is an absolutely fine way to do your pausing system. But we are able to use the instance deactivation as a pausing system while still maintaining certain elements of the pausing system of the instances. So I know for sure that I'm going to want to deactivate my enemy, and I know for sure I'm going to want to deactivate my player. I do not want my player or my enemy to be running code because I don't want my enemies moving during pausing, and I don't want my player to react to any kind of input that I do in my pause menu that would cause anything weird to happen when the game gets unpaused. You also don't want like your enemy to be somewhere else because they kept walking during a pause. So how do we do that without deactivating our walls and our camera and everything else? Well, it's rather simple actually. So I'm going to go back to OGame. I'm going to go back to the create layer, and I'm going to say, the create event, and I'm going to say player layer as a variable, and I'm going to say layer get ID. And I'm able to do this because I actually have a layer in my room called player, and the only thing that exists in that layer is the player. I also have an enemy layer, and the only thing that's going to exist in this layer are instances of enemies. And the main reason I do this is not only to keep them separate on layers, but also just to make sure that the player is always drawn in front of the enemy. I never want the enemy to be standing in front of my player and hide the playable character from the person playing the game. I want the player character to always be front and center in the game so that the player always knows where they are in the game world. So I always have my player being the thing drawn the furthest forward, so that it's just never hidden by any kind of obstacle in the world. There are certain exceptions to this depending on your game, but that's just how I do things. So I'm going to go layer get ID, and I'm going to say player. The most important thing to do is you got to make sure that you are spelling them right, and also in your player layer is called player in every single room, and your enemy layer is called enemy in every single room in order for this to work properly. So then I'm going to go enemy layer equals layer get ID, and then the name is enemy. And then I'm going to copy these two lines, and then I'm going to go down to the room start event, and I'm going to paste them so that every time you enter a new room, you are getting the ID of that layer. And then here, instead of instance deactivate all, I'm going to go instance deactivate layer, player layer. Then I'm going to go instance deactivate layer, enemy layer. And then I'm going to grab these two. I'm going to copy them. I'm going to paste them here. And then I'm just going to delete those two letters. And that will just deactivate anything that exists on the player layer and on the enemy layer. But we'll keep like the camera and the game, like in the game object and the walls and everything completely intact. that is something you actually have to be careful about. So here, I am referencing the oPlayer.x and the oPlayer.y. But as soon as I deactivate it, oPlayer no longer exists. So the game crashes and returns an error. So I'm going to say if instance exists. oPlayer. I didn't even think about that. So now, my walls are still intact, everything is still there, the camera object still exists, the OGame object still exists, it's just the player and the enemy and everything else that exists on those layers are no longer exist. When I hit enter, they come back into existence. Again, this is a great method if you are filling most of your screen with a menu. I wouldn't recommend it for else. So another good way to be able to only deactivate certain instances is I'm actually going to create a new object, and I'm going to call this oPauser. And I'm not going to do anything with it. I'm just going to have it exist. And then I'm going to go to enemy, and I'm going to set its parent to be oPauser. And then if you have like a parent enemy, so if I had multiple enemies, every single enemy I have would be a child of oEnemy. So that way I can call, like for my collisions, I can just see if I'm colliding with oEnemy and not see if I'm colliding with every single different instance of the enemy. You can just make the parent of everything be a child of oPauser, and then everything underneath it will also be a child of oPauser, as well as being a child of the other parent. And I'm going to go to my oPlayer, and I'm also going to set its parent to be oPauser. And then I'm going to go back to my game instance, and instead of doing this, I'm going to go instance deactivate object oPauser. Then here I'm going to go instance activate object oPauser. And this will give you kind of customizable control over what does and doesn't get deactivated. So there are certain things in your world, like background elements that are interactable, like a locked door or something that the player can go up to and activate, and then that will cause it to unlock if they have a key or something. You don't want that to deactivate because you don't want your player, like the person playing the game, to look at the game and see that that door has disappeared with the lock on it, and then when they unpause it, it reappears. That's just not something that you want. So this gives you customizable control over what does and doesn't get deactivated during a pause. So if I go back to my game now, it's going to work almost the same. Well, exactly the same. And then I can add or subtract objects from being an instance, a child instance of oPauser. So that is the ins and outs of how to do pausing via instance deactivation and activation. Okay, so the next method I'm going to be showing you guys has nothing to do with deactivating objects whatsoever. Instead, we're just going to be controlling their animation speed and then controlling whether or not they are running code. So that way they could continue to be drawn, they just come to a freezing halt, which in my opinion just looks a lot better. It has a very similar effect to the Sarah Spalding's method of pretty much screenshotting the screen and then creating a new surface and then drawing that screenshot over your screen, even though you're deactivating everything. It's going to work pretty much the same way as deactivation, where things are no longer going to be running code, so the variables will no longer be updated, and the animation will stop animating. The only real difference is that we are not actually going to be deactivating them, and also they're going to continue to be drawn. So they're still going to be there in the screen. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to my scripts, and I'm going to open up the global script, and I'm going to get rid of paused. We don't need it. I'm going to do global.gamespeed equals 1. And the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my OGame object, where I am handling my pausing. And then here, instead of changing the boolean of global.pause when we pause, when they hit the pause key, I am instead going to say if global.gamespeed equals 1, which it currently will, global.gamespeed equals 0. Else global.gamespeed equals 1. So we're doing the same thing, but instead of changing global.pause to false and then, to true and then back to false, we're just going to be changing global.gamespeed to 0 and then back to 1, which works almost the same way. But since we're no longer doing this, and this no longer exists as a variable, we're going to delete that so that we don't run into any errors. Also, in the camera, we no longer need this check. Next, I'm going to go to my O player. I'm going to go to the step event. I'm going to write if global.gamespeed equals 1. I'm going to scroll to the bottom, way down here. And then to make this look a little neater, I'm going to highlight this all and hit tab. So now this code will only run if global.gamespeed equals 1. And then outside of this bracket, I'm going to say image speed equals global.gamespeed. And what this will do is it will stop all of the code from running, and it will also stop the animation from animating. But it will still be on its current frame in the animation, and the player will be exactly where they are. They just won't be moving or updating. And then I'm going to go to OEnemy. I'm going to do the same thing here. I'm going to say if global.gamespeed equals 1. And then I'm going to tab this to make it look neater. I'm going to get rid of that breakpoint I accidentally put in there. And now I'm going to run this game. Everything works. I move normal. Everything's fine. Pause. Unpause. Pause. Unpause. If I do it like while I'm walking, mid-step. And then if you're going to be drawing your your pause menu and stuff, instead of going to the draw event or the draw GUI event and being like if global.paused, do this, you can be like if global game speed equals 0. Or another thing you can do is you can still have the global.pause variable, and you can still swap it true or false even though you are using the game speed variable to actually do the pausing. And one great reason to do this that I can think of is if for any reason you have some kind of mechanic where you want it to look like time freezes. Like if you have like a targeting system or something and you want time to freeze while the player chooses their target, you can just set game speed to 0 and then have a targeting object that is not affected by game speed, or even have it so they're only active if game speed equals 0, but it's not paused. And you can do things, have the player do things in your world, and it looks like everything is frozen. But then if, global.paused is true, also do up the pause menu. And this is just a lot better for, like, if the player can still see majority of the screen while they are paused, you want the screen to still look like the screen, just frozen. And this does that. So those are the only two pausing systems that I'm going to be showing you guys today. Like I said, if you're interested in a third alternative, Sarah Spalding has a wonderful tutorial on another method of pausing, and I will be linking that in the description down below. With all of that being said, I want to thank you guys very much for watching. If there are any tutorials that you guys would like me to do that I haven't done yet, please let me know and I will absolutely do them. If you have any questions about what I have done today, or you're having issues implementing it into your own project, it's causing bugs or something, please again let me know. I will do my absolute best to try to help you through that. If I'm going to be teaching you guys code, I should be standing behind that code, and that is something I am willing to do. But with that said, I'm going to say the usual YouTube jargon. I'm going to say please like this video if it helped you, please comment, and please subscribe to my channel. Other than that, I hope you guys are having a good one, and peace out.